What then is all the noise about? Why are construction workers singled out for attack?
Lane Kirkland, Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, answers these questions.
There are some who argue that teenagers should receive a lower minimum wage than adults.
Andrew J. Biemiller, the AFL-CIO's Director of Legislation, responds to this argument. All on COPE Report for June 1971.
Oh, the union is the place for me, the place for working men who want some time to sing and play and money they can spend on the line, on the line.
This month on Side 1, an in-depth look at construction labor. The AFL-CIO testifies on a $2 minimum wage. Background information on public service jobs. And a report by COPE Director Al Barkin on the 18-year-old vote. Reports of interest to trade union officials.
I'm standing on the picket line 'cause I want a living wage. We'll stick together through the wind and the weather. We'll get that living wage. On the line, on the line.
There are many myths being fostered about construction labor by the press and the Nixon administration. To set the record straight, COPE Report talked to AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Lane Kirkland. We asked him, are construction wages too high?
In January of this year, the average hourly wage of the urban union construction worker was $6.39. In a fairly good year, he will work 1,500 hours for an annual income of slightly under $9,600. The average construction worker, however, does not work 1,500 hours a year. He works 1,200 to 1,400 hours. In 1970, the average urban union construction worker worked 1,400 hours at an average hourly rate of $6.18. Thus, his earnings for the year came to $8,650. Are construction wages too high? Too high for what? What are your standards? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a modest but adequate standard of living for an urban family of 4 requires more than $11,000 a year. That is $1,400 more than the average urban union construction worker can expect to make this year, if it's a fairly good year. That is $2,400 more than this same worker actually made last year.
What's all the noise about, Mr. Kirkland? Why are construction workers singled out for attack?
Let me suggest one reason: old-fashioned class prejudice, especially on the part of the professional, college-educated elite. They cannot abide the idea of a worker, particularly one who works with his hands, making as much as $10,000 a year. It is all right for their own sons to start at $12,000 a year as management trainees, but that a skilled craftsman with years on the job and with a wife and children to support, that he should edge up to or even cross the magical 5-figure line is a transgression of deep unspoken codes, a sure sign of rampant vulgarity and grasping materialism.
Do construction workers earn their pay? Mr. Kirkland.
Construction workers more than earn their pay. Their work is hard and hazardous. It is twice as dangerous as factory work and produces injuries 3 times as severe. Construction workers lose time and money in bad weather. They suffer frequent periods of unemployment between jobs, on the average of 17 weeks a year. Their national unemployment rate is roughly 12%, twice the national rate. For most workers in unionized industries, job security increases with seniority. Not so for the construction worker. As he grows older, he may find it harder and harder to get and to keep a job.
Mr. Kirkland does not agree with Nixon administration spokesman that construction wages are the cause of inflation.
Workers' wages, including construction wages, are not the causes of inflation, but its victims. Yet the chorus continues its din, generously advising workers to be borne downward on the economic escalator in the name of fighting inflation. The strategy is to blame the unions for inflation, and so the editorialists inveigh against the 11.9% wage increases won by urban building trades workers in 1970, but say nothing about last year's soaring bank profits, up 21.9% for J.P. Morgan, up 19.2% for First National Bank of Dallas, up 16.1% for Chase Manhattan, up 15.2% for Bankers Trust, and so it goes.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
The AFL-CIO recently testified in support of an immediate increase in the minimum wage to at least $2 an hour. Cope Report was there when Director of Legislation Andrew Biemiller told the congressman why.
Justice for low-wage workers demands immediate action to raise the minimum wage. The economy needs and must have the added purchasing power these increases will provide. The AFL-CIO believes that the minimum wage should be increased immediately to at least $2 an hour. In 1966, we thought the $1.60 minimum wage was tolerable, but it is utterly inadequate in 1971 in the face of 5 years of an inflationary rise in living costs.
Mr. Biemiller emphasized the importance of a minimum wage increase in the fight against poverty.
Nearly two-thirds of the 24 million poor in America are members of families headed by a worker in the labor force. At $2 an hour, the full-time worker would earn approximately $4,000 a year. This is close to the 1970 government-defined poverty level of approximately $3,900 for a non-farm family of 4. But $2 an hour represents quite an improvement over the $3,200 such worker earns at the present rate. Inflation hits the lowest income people harder than anyone else. Today's minimum wage of $1.60 buys less than $1.25 bought in 1966.
Mr. Biemiller rejected claims that increases in the minimum wage cause widespread unemployment.
Historically, increases in the minimum wage have raised the wages of most of the nation's lowest paid workers, raising their standard of living and helping to bring them and their families into America's mainstream. Employment increased and business prospered. We say it is time to apply that same remedy again.
There are some who argue that teenagers should receive a lower minimum wage than adults. Mr. Biemiller pointed out the fallacy of this approach.
A lower minimum wage for teenagers would have 4 distinct disadvantages: displacement of working heads of families, blatant discrimination against young workers, loss of dignity in the work they perform, and an unfair increase in profits for those unscrupulous employers who would discriminate against teenagers by paying them a lower wage than adults for the same work. If there were any validity at all to arguments for a lower minimum wage for teenagers, then these people should be advocating an even lower minimum wage for black teenagers, because unemployment rates for young blacks are much higher than for other teenagers. Naturally, no one in his right mind could support this kind of ridiculous proposal. A growing economy and full employment, in other words, increased jobs, will solve teenage unemployment.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
The AFL-CIO strongly supports the concept of public service jobs in times of high unemployment. For details of the Public Service Jobs Bill, Cope Report talked to Ken Young, the Assistant Director of the AFL-CIO Legislative Department. Mr. Young, how necessary is the Public Service Jobs Bill?
Terribly necessary, not as a total answer to the nation's unemployment problem, but it certainly is a start in getting rid of some of the high unemployment throughout the country and providing real jobs for people who are both unemployed and underemployed. What this bill does is match the needs for creating jobs with the needs for public service work. And I don't mean dead-end work. I mean work that has to be filled in the communities, work in safety, in education, in health, conservation, and rural development. This bill would provide an estimated 150,000 jobs, so it isn't going to answer the continuous 6.1% unemployment figure. But it's going to be a start in the right direction by funding these jobs, filling job vacancies that are open now because the cities and states just can't meet the payrolls.
President Nixon vetoed a similar public service jobs bill last December. Cope Report asked Mr. Young why that veto was bad for the economy.
Well, of course, if the president hadn't vetoed the bill, we'd have people on these jobs today, and the unemployment rate would probably be lower, and many communities would be having their needs met. Now, the president at that time vetoed the bill, both as unnecessary, saying that the unemployment rate was going to go down anyway, which it hasn't done, and further because he said he wanted training programs, not dead-end jobs. These aren't dead-end jobs. These are jobs that can be filled by unskilled people, skilled people, and white-collar workers, such as engineers. There's nothing in this bill that talks about just leaf raking. There are opportunities for advancement, for promotion, for training, And there's no reason why America's unemployed and underemployed people cannot work in the public sector as well as in the private sector. Furthermore, the president really is talking about just training programs, having training spots open. And we say that there are many, many training programs. The problem today is not training, it's job creation. There's nothing worse than having some unemployed person go through a series of training programs only to find there's no job at the end.
Mr. Young, what is the philosophy behind the Public Service Jobs Bill?
When unemployment is high, it's a responsibility of the federal government not just to say that things are going to get better and just wait and hope that things get better. It's the responsibility of the federal government to use its funds and its resources to put people back to work. Help people find work, needed work, and that's what this bill does.
The youth vote has been in the news lately as a result of a Supreme Court decision permitting 18 to 20-year-olds to vote in federal elections. We went to Cope Director Al Barkin and asked what impact the youth vote will have in 1972.
There are signs that young people are much more inclined to vote liberal than conservative, but there are also indications that they are extremely selective. One example is that a great number of young people don't feel party-oriented. A recent Gallup poll showed that 42% of the 18 to 20 age group consider themselves independent. But those who do express a party preference are overwhelmingly for the Democrats. So, overall, it would seem clear that there should be a lot of votes among the 18 to 20-year-olds for our endorsed candidates. But they're going to have to work for it, and so are we.
Cope Report asked Director Barkin if he felt young voters eligible to vote for the first time would turn out at the polls.
What little experience there has been so far with young voters suggests that they won't vote in great numbers. Last year, for example, young persons under 21 years of age were eligible to vote in 4 states. Only 26% of them actually voted, while about 50% of voters over 21 went to the polls. But I think these figures are misleading. No special efforts to involve these young people in the political process had been made by the political parties. I think the fact that 1972 will be a presidential year will generate tremendous interest and a big turnout among young voters.
Who are these young voters and where are they? Cope Report put this question to Director Barkin.
Well, there are 11 million of them, and that comprises nearly 1/10 of the total number of citizens eligible to vote. And I think most people have been looking in the wrong places for them. If you listen to the political pundits or read the newspapers, you get the impression all these young people are clustered on the college campuses and in the high schools of the nation. But the fact is, the majority of the 11 million are not in college, and they are not in high school. 4 million are working, 1.5 million are housewives, and 800,000 are in the armed forces. And thousands of these young people are our members, and many thousands more are children of our members. So I would say to Cope people on all levels, find out where our young members are, include them in, get them involved, give them responsibility. Don't wait until 1972. Do it now. Harness the energy of the young people, and we'll take a long step toward victory in 1972.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
On side 2 of this cassette, Cope Report continues with material designed to be presented at local union meetings. A special report on the economy, and an analysis of President Nixon's health insurance bill, all on Cope Report, Side 2.
Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
We are in trouble in this country economically, in deep trouble. We find the cost of living at its highest point in our history. We find 6% unemployment, over 5 million Americans officially looking for work. That does not represent the full figure because those who get sick and tired of looking for work and don't apply at the employment offices, they're more or less dropped. Those who are working part-time are figured in the computations as if they are fully employed.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on.
COPE report for June 1971. This month, a special report for union members on America's economic problems, with AFL-CIO President George Meany and Senator Henry M. Jackson. And Representative James Corman tells workers what's wrong with the Nixon health insurance program. Reports of importance to union members and their families.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on.
COPE report was at the Utility Workers Convention when President Meany put economic problems in perspective. He said that when the Nixon administration came into office, America had experienced 94 months of uninterrupted economic progress under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. Unemployment was down to 2.7%. But Nixon wanted to curb inflation.
So they came in with the so-called Nixon administration's economic gain plan. It called for fiscal and monetary policies designed to cool off the economy, restrict credit, restrict the flow of money into the economy. And this was to be done with no increase in unemployment. Well, what happened? They cooled off the economy, all right. They restricted credit, and within 2 years, we had 2,200,000 more people unemployed than we had in January of 1969. We had the highest interest rates in 100 years, drastically affecting the housing industry and adversely affecting all the small businessmen in the country who could not borrow under the restricted rates, and adversely affecting everybody who had to buy or would like to buy a new home. Interest rates going as high as 10%, 7.5%, 8%, and then they add on a few points. And we got to the situation where the costs were driven up that even a man in the $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 a year class could not afford to buy his own home.
Instead of concrete programs to get the economy moving again, the administration has come up with a new gimmick called inflation alerts. One of these alerts said the steelworkers' settlement with the can industry should not be carried over to the steel industry. President Meany told his audience what it means.
This means the steel workers, representing 450,000 workers in steel, are going into their contract negotiations with the employer, and the employer is the U.S. Steel Corporation, Bethlehem, Jones and Lockman, all the big steel giants. They're going into those contract negotiations with a government edict or a government pronouncement that the money they got, the 9% from the can companies, is too high. In other words, they're going into negotiations with government definitely on the side of the employer. Now, how's that for interfering with collective bargaining? In other words, they're moving to the point where it's quite possible that they will move into steel and impose a settlement, a government settlement on the workers and try to enforce it by some sort of court injunction. Well, I don't think the steel workers are going to buy that, and I don't think the American trade union movement is going to buy that.
The administration is trying to make labor the scapegoat for the failure of its economic policies, while at the same time giving big business tax breaks and winking at huge bank profits and executive salaries. President Meany has an idea what their goal is.
Well, what they're pointing toward, if they're successful, I don't think they're going to be successful, is the establishment of a low-wage economy in this country. And if they look around the world, yes, everywhere in the world, where wages are lower, they will see what a low-wage economy means. Over the history of this country, the last 50 years, the best customer for American industry is the American worker. So when they're trying to beat down labor, when they're trying to make labor the scapegoat, they are launching a direct attack on the purchasing power, that's needed to keep this economy going.
President Meany had this summary.
The Nixon administration's financial, fiscal, and monetary economic plan was a complete, absolute, miserable failure.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on.
One of the sharpest critics of Nixon administration economic policies has been Senator Henry M. Jackson of Washington. Cope Report visited Senator Jackson in his office to get background for union members on the state of the economy. First, the senator discussed wage and price controls.
I reject the approach of this administration in singling out particular price schedules or wage settlements on an arbitrary basis. The so-called inflation alerts, and there have been 3 of them, simply do not work. This is a little more of that Madison Avenue approach. They alert us largely to what is past and what is trivial. In my view, if government intervention is called for, it would be much more equitable as well as much more effective if it were exercised as a part of a systematic wage price policy based on publicly stated rules and carefully engineered administrative procedures. I think we should at least insist that we define sin before we stone the sinners about being out of line on wages, as an example.
Senator Jackson looks at unemployment figures as human beings, not statistics.
It's quite clear that the drastic dimensions of today's unemployment are little understood by many leaders in the present government. To talk simply of national unemployment rate of 5 or 6% is totally misleading. There are thousands of Americans out of work, looking for work, hoping for work, who never show up in the statistic involved. There are dozens of urban areas where unemployment is so widespread they can only be described as an economic disaster area. For the young and the black, for the skilled and the unskilled, for the first-time job seeker and the old-time job loser, the cold computations of national unemployment rates can never reflect the real tragedy of lost hope, self-respect, lost opportunity to participate in the American dream.
Senator Jackson believes the economy needs programs to create jobs and a tax cut for workers.
Economic growth without job opportunities, of course, makes little sense to me or to anyone else. It's fine to talk about economic growth that benefits the haves, and what happens? The have-nots go wanting. We've got to make the jobs available now. The time has come for the country to recognize and accept the concept of public service employment, which the American labor movement strongly endorses. As long as substantial unemployment persists, I propose that we create a minimum of 500,000 constructive job opportunities in the public sector. Needless to say, the urgent unmet needs of government at all levels would profit from this program. I think next there should be a move for a cut in the income tax, the personal income tax, to increase the amount that will be available in the way of a personal exemption, so that the wage earner, and the worker especially, will have money in his and her pockets to be able to buy the things that we need in order to provide for a decent standard of living.
In conclusion, Senator Jackson told Cope Report,
I don't accept the idea that we can tolerate unemployment at any level. This is nonsense. And what the administration has proposed will not do the job of bringing unemployment down to levels that are consistent with maintaining a viable, sound economic society. A society which will make it possible for those who want to work and are willing to work to obtain jobs. What they're projecting ahead for the next 2 years are continuing high levels of unemployment. And I say this kind of program is no program at all. We need to reverse the direction by providing opportunities for immediate employment particularly in the areas of public service, which we have fought so long and hard for in the Congress of the United States.
When the Union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. For no force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one, but the Union makes us strong.
Representative James Corman of California is one of the principal sponsors of National Health Security, the AFL-CIO-supported National Health Insurance Program. A member of the prestigious House Ways and Means Committee, which will first consider national health insurance, Representative Corman knows the details of all proposals. COPE Report asked him how the Nixon proposal differs from national health security.
Well, let's look at it in three ways. First, who is covered? Under the Nixon proposal, people would be covered while they were employed full-time. They would be covered if they are very poor, that is, eligible for Medicaid. And they would continue to be covered under Medicare. Self-employed people would not be covered. Part-time employed people would not be covered. And those who are not employed but not in poverty would not be covered. Under the National Health Security Program, every resident of the United States would be covered for all of his medical care. Then looking at how it's paid for. Under the Nixon proposal, it is paid for by insurance premiums to a private insurance company, 25% to be paid by the employee and 75% by the employer. This, of course, is the reason that the coverage must be so very limited. Under the National Health Security Program, a trust fund is set up. One half is paid for out of general funds, one half out of a special employer-employee tax or a tax on unearned income of 1% up to $15,000. And then looking at how medical resources are utilized. There is no change in the present system under the Nixon proposal. There would be no increase in the efficiency of the delivery of medical care. Under the Health Security Program, group practice would be encouraged, and 5% of the total trust funds would be used to expand the availability of health resources. And so the Nixon proposal just doesn't provide as much, it doesn't provide it for as many people. It doesn't meet the needs of the health care of American citizens.
Why is national health security better for working men and women than the Nixon program? Representative Corman.
Well, the principal reason is that the Nixon proposal would be much more expensive for employees, and secondly, that the premiums would be higher. The care is limited under the Nixon proposal. It involves co-insurance. It has a limitation on the kinds of medical care one can get, and the premiums will be set pretty much at the good conscience of the private insurance companies. Under the National Health Security Program, the care is comprehensive with some very minor limitations. All of one's medical expenses would be paid, whether he is working or not. While he works, he has to put in 1% of the first $15,000 into the trust fund to pay for it.
One of the major problems with medical care is its soaring cost. COPE Report asked Representative Corman what cost controls are built into national health security and the Nixon proposal.
First of all, the Health Security Program provides for cost controls. Under the Secretary of HEW, there will be a medical board of 5 people. They, in turn, will have 10 regional committees, and each committee will have 10 committees or 100 committees across the country. They will be the ones to spend the trust funds, and it will be their obligation to cover the total medical needs of the country within those trust funds, and therefore they will have to regulate the cost of medical services. There is no cost control in the Nixon health proposal.
Representative Corman, if the Nixon program won't control medical costs or provide workers the type of health care they need, who stands to benefit?
Well, the only beneficiary that I can see is the private health insurance companies, because they'll be left in business. They will not be regulated to any extent, and every employer in the nation will be required to do business with some insurance company.
In our hands is placed the power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of millions magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the Union makes us strong.
This has been COPE Report. Next month, more up-to-the-minute reports on politics, legislation, the economy. Reports on the issues that concern working men and women. All on COPE Report.
For the Union makes us strong.